3 a.m. on a Tuesday in February 1960, and James Patterson is sitting alone in a cold interrogation room at the 32nd Precinct. Two federal agents are staring at him from across a metal table that's bolted to the concrete floor. One of them slides a manila folder toward him. Inside are photographs of him accepting envelopes, photographs of him talking to men in expensive suits, photographs of him walking into buildings he has no business being in. The agent leans forward, his breath smelling like stale coffee and cigarettes, and says in a voice that sounds almost sympathetic, "Jimmy, you're a good man. We know that. But you're in deep now. Deeper than you understand. Help us, and we'll make sure your family is safe. Stay quiet, and you'll never see your little girl grow up." Jimmy's hands are shaking. His throat is dry. He knows that whatever he says next will change everything. But to understand how a simple sandwich vendor from Harlem ended up in this room, staring at federal agents who want to destroy the most dangerous man in New York, you have to go back 5 years. Back to when Jimmy Patterson was nobody. Back to when all he wanted was to keep his daughter alive and his family fed. Back to a cold winter night when a stranger walked up to his cart asking for food he couldn't pay for. James Patterson was born in South Carolina in 1918, the son of a sharecropper who died when Jimmy was 14. His mother worked herself to death 3 years later. Jimmy came north in 1937 with $17 in his pocket and a borrowed coat that didn't fit. He found work in Harlem doing whatever he could, loading trucks, sweeping floors, washing dishes in kitchens where the owner wouldn't let him eat the food he cooked. By 1942, he'd saved enough to buy a used sandwich cart from a Jewish man on 119th Street who was moving to Brooklyn. The cart was dented, the wheels squeaked, and the grill barely worked, but it was his. He met Ruth at a church social in 1944. She was a housekeeper for a white family on the Upper East Side. She had kind eyes and a quiet strength that made Jimmy feel like maybe, just maybe, things could be good. They married that same year in a small ceremony at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Dorothy was born in 1946. She was tiny, fragile, beautiful. At 6 months old, she started wheezing. The doctors said it was asthma. They said she needed medicine, expensive medicine that cost more than Jimmy made in 2 weeks. So Jimmy worked. Every single day. He pushed his cart to the corner of 125th and Lenox at 6 in the morning and didn't pack up until midnight. He sold ham sandwiches, roast beef sandwiches, egg sandwiches, whatever he could make cheap and sell for 50 cents. Most days he cleared maybe $3 after expenses. On good days, 5. Ruth cleaned houses when her back allowed it, but she'd injured it badly in 1953, lifting a heavy box for one of her employers. She couldn't work much anymore. They lived in a 2-room apartment on the 2nd floor of a crumbling building on 128th Street. The walls were thin. The heat barely worked. In winter, you could see your breath inside, but it was theirs, and Jimmy made sure the rent was paid on time every month. $12. $12 that sometimes meant they ate rice and beans for a week straight. Dorothy's medicine cost $4 a bottle, and she needed a new bottle every 10 days. Jimmy did the math in his head constantly. Rent, medicine, food. There was never enough. Never. But there was something his father had told him when he was a boy, something that stuck with Jimmy through all the hard years. A man's character isn't what he does when he's got plenty. It's what he does when he's got nothing. His father used to give away food during the Depression, neighbors who were starving, families with children who hadn't eaten in days, even when they barely had anything themselves. Jimmy's father would say, "Nobody leaves my table hungry. I don't care if we eat less, nobody leaves hungry." Jimmy carried that with him. So even when he was broke, even when he was behind on rent, even when Dorothy needed medicine and there wasn't enough money, if someone came to his cart and couldn't pay, he'd feed them anyway. It was February 1955, a Wednesday night. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. The kind of cold that makes your fingers stiff and your face numb. Jimmy had been working since 6 that morning. It was almost 11 now. The streets were mostly empty. A few drunks stumbling home, a taxi rolling slowly past, the wind cutting down Lenox Avenue like a razor. Jimmy was cleaning his grill, scraping off the grease, getting ready to close up, when he heard footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps. He looked up. A man was walking toward him out of the shadows. The man was black, maybe 50 years old, stocky build, wearing a long wool coat that had seen better days. The coat was dirty. There were stains on the sleeves. His shoes were scuffed and worn down at the heels. He had a hat pulled low over his face. His hands were in his pockets. He walked like someone who was tired. Not just tired from a long day, tired from life. He stopped in front of Jimmy's cart and looked at the menu board. Jimmy had written the prices in chalk. Ham sandwich, 50 cents. Roast beef, 60 cents. Egg sandwich, 40 cents. The man stared at the board for a long time. Then he said, his voice low and rough, "Let me get a roast beef, pickles, mustard." Jimmy nodded. "Coming right up." He fired up the grill one more time, pulled out the roast beef he'd cooked that afternoon, sliced it thin, put it on bread with pickles and mustard, wrapped it in wax paper. He handed it to the man. 60 cents. The man reached into his coat pocket, then his pants pocket, then the other side. His face didn't change, but his hands moved slower. He checked his pockets again. Nothing. He looked down. For just a second, Jimmy saw something in the man's eyes. Not anger, not frustration. Shame. The kind of shame a man feels when he can't do something as simple as pay for a sandwich. The man started to hand the sandwich back. "I'm sorry, I thought I had..." Jimmy held up his hand. "Don't worry about it. It's on the house." The man looked at him. Really looked at him. His eyes were sharp, calculating, like he was trying to figure out if this was a trick or an insult. Jimmy just smiled. "Everybody has bad days. Eat." The man took the sandwich. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Jimmy shook it. The man's grip was firm, strong, the kind of handshake that said more than words. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Jimmy. Jimmy Patterson." The man nodded slowly. "Thank you, Jimmy. I won't forget this." Then he turned and walked back into the shadows. Jimmy watched him go, then went back to cleaning his grill. He didn't think much of it. He'd given away food before. It wasn't a big deal. Just a sandwich. Just 60 cents. What Jimmy didn't know was that the man he'd just fed was Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. Bumpy Johnson. The most powerful black gangster in Harlem. The man who controlled the numbers racket, the heroin trade, the protection schemes. The man who had more cops and politicians on his payroll than the mayor. The man who, just 2 hours earlier, had barely escaped an ambush by a rival crew and had been walking the streets trying to figure out who'd set him up. Bumpy Johnson didn't forget anything, especially kindness. 2 days later, Jimmy was at his cart around 9 in the morning. It was Friday. The streets were busy, people heading to work, kids walking to school, the usual rhythm of Harlem. Then a car pulled up, a black Cadillac, no plates. The windows were tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. Jimmy felt his stomach tighten. In Harlem, cars like that meant one of two things: cops or gangsters. The back door opened. 2 men stepped out. Both were wearing long wool overcoats and fedoras. One was tall and thin with a scar running down his left cheek. The other was shorter, stocky, with a gold watch that caught the morning sun. They walked straight to Jimmy's cart. The tall one spoke first. "You Jimmy Patterson?" Jimmy's mouth went dry. "Yeah, that's me." The stocky one reached into his coat. Jimmy's heart stopped. But the man didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out an envelope. A thick envelope. He placed it on the cart in front of Jimmy. "This is for you. If you enjoy learning more about stories from the American Mafia underworld, click the button and subscribe to our channel." Jimmy stared at the envelope. "What is it?" "Open it." Jimmy's hands were shaking as he picked it up. He tore it open. Inside were bills, 20s, 50s, hundreds, more money than Jimmy had ever seen in his life. He started counting. $200, $500, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. Jimmy looked up at the 2 men, his face pale. I can't take this. This is too much. I just gave him a sandwich. It was 60 cents. The tall man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "It ain't about the sandwich. The stocky one pulled out a small white card. He placed it next to the envelope. On the card was an address written in neat handwriting. 412 West 147th Street, apartment 3B. You ever got a problem? The stocky man said quietly. A real problem, you go to that address. You knock on the door. You tell them who you are, they'll help you. But you only use it once. You understand? Once in your whole life. So choose carefully. Jimmy's hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold the card. Who sent you? The tall man leaned in close. The man you fed Wednesday night. He don't forget kindness, but he also don't forget disrespect. You take that money. You use it for your family. You don't tell nobody where it came from. You don't go to the cops. You don't ask questions. You just take it and be grateful. Then both men turned and walked back to the Cadillac. The engine started. The car pulled away and disappeared down Lenox Avenue. Jimmy stood there holding $2,000 and a white card with an address on it. His whole body was shaking. People walked past him like nothing had happened. Like his entire life hadn't just changed in the span of 2 minutes. That night, Jimmy sat on the floor of his apartment with the money spread out in front of him. Ruth sat on the bed holding Dorothy, who was asleep. Ruth's face was tight with fear. We have to give it back, she whispered. We can't keep this. You know where this money came from. You know what kind of people. I don't know anything, Jimmy said, but his voice had no conviction. Ruth started crying quietly. Jimmy, we're good people. We go to church. We work hard. We don't get mixed up in this kind of thing. If we take this money, we owe them something. People like that, they don't just give you money for nothing, they own you. Jimmy looked at his daughter. Dorothy's breathing was labored even in sleep. He could hear the wheeze in her chest. He thought about the medicine they couldn't afford, the rent they were 2 weeks behind on, the hole in Ruth's only pair of shoes that she tried to cover with cardboard. What if we just use it for what we need? He said quietly. Medicine, rent, food, we don't spend it on anything else. We just use it to survive. Ruth wiped her eyes. And then what? What happens when they come back? What do they want from you? Jimmy didn't have an answer. He folded the money carefully and hid it inside an old coffee can in the back of their tiny kitchen cabinet. He put the white card in his wallet. He didn't sleep that night. He just lay on the floor staring at the ceiling, listening to his daughter breathe, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The next week, Jimmy started noticing things, small things. A man sitting on a bench across the street reading the same newspaper for 3 hours. A black Cadillac that drove past his cart twice in one afternoon, slowing down both times. A customer who ordered a sandwich but barely ate it, just stood there watching, asking questions. How long you been working this corner? You got family? Where you live? Jimmy answered carefully. He kept his head down. He used the money slowly. $20 for Dorothy's medicine, $15 to pay back the rent, $30 for groceries. Real groceries, meat, vegetables, bread that wasn't stale. Ruth cried when she saw the food, not from happiness, from fear. They're watching us now, she said. I can feel it. She was right. Jimmy could feel it too. Eyes on him everywhere he went. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted. He just knew that the simple act of feeding a hungry man had connected him to something dangerous, something he didn't understand. He thought about going to the police. But what would he say? A man gave me $2,000 and I don't know why. They'd either laugh at him or arrest him for lying. So he stayed quiet. He worked. He went home. He tried to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. 3 weeks after the men in the Cadillac visited him, Jimmy was closing up his cart around 11:30 at night. The streets were empty except for a few stragglers. That's when he heard them. Voices, loud, aggressive. 5 men walking toward him from the direction of 126th Street. They were young, maybe mid-20s, white, wearing leather jackets and slicked back hair. Jimmy recognized the type immediately. Small-time hoods. Guys who thought they were tougher than they were. The leader was tall, maybe 6'2", with a thin face and mean eyes. He had a scar across his knuckles like he'd been in plenty of fights. The other 4 followed behind him like dogs. They walked up to Jimmy's cart and the leader smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Hey, sandwich man, we're hungry. Make us something." Jimmy nodded. "Sure, what do you want?" "5 sandwiches, roast beef, everything on them, and make it fast." Jimmy started preparing the food. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. He could feel the tension coming off these guys like heat. He finished the sandwiches and wrapped them up. "That'll be $3. The leader picked up one of the sandwiches and took a big bite. He chewed slowly. Then he spit it out onto the ground. "That tastes like shit." Jimmy knew this had nothing to do with the sandwich. This was about power, about humiliation. "I can make you another one," Jimmy said calmly. The leader stepped closer. "You know what? I don't think I'm gonna pay." One of the other guys laughed and kicked over Jimmy's trash can. Another one grabbed a bottle of mustard and squeezed it all over the cart. "You got a problem with that?" the leader asked. Jimmy clenched his fists but said nothing. There were 5 of them. He was alone. He was 42 years old. These were young men looking for a fight. "Didn't think so," the leader said. Then he leaned in close. "We're gonna be coming by regular now, and you're gonna feed us for free. Because this is our neighborhood. You're just working here, you understand?" Jimmy nodded. The 5 men walked away laughing. Jimmy spent the next hour cleaning mustard off his cart. His hands were shaking with rage. But it got worse. A week later, Jimmy heard that an elderly woman named Miss Carey, who lived 3 doors down from him and sold tamales from her apartment, had her place burned. Not completely destroyed, but enough to ruin everything she owned. Word on the street was that the same 5 guys had demanded she pay them $10 a week for protection. When she refused, they came back with gasoline. Miss Carey was in her 70s. She survived off the money she made selling tamales to neighbors. Now she had nothing. The police came. They took a report. They did nothing. This was Harlem. The cops didn't care about an old black woman who got her apartment burned by white thugs from Little Italy who crossed into the neighborhood looking for easy targets. Jimmy visited Miss Carey in the hospital. She had burns on her hands from trying to put out the fire. She was crying, not from the pain, from the helplessness. "They said they'd come back," she whispered. "They said next time they'd burn me inside." That night, Jimmy sat in his apartment holding the white card, the card with the address. 412 West 147th Street, apartment 3B. Ruth saw him staring at it. "Don't," she said. "Jimmy, please don't." "They burned an old woman's house," Jimmy said quietly. "They're gonna keep doing it. To her, to me, to everybody on this block who can't fight back. And you think going to them is gonna make it better? You think those people are gonna help out of the goodness of their hearts? Jimmy, they're criminals. They'll want something from you. They always do." Jimmy put the card in his pocket. "Maybe, but if I don't do something, more people are gonna get hurt." The next day, the 5 men came back to Jimmy's cart. Same routine, demanding food, not paying. This time they shoved his cart so hard it almost tipped over. The leader got right in Jimmy's face. "You got a problem, sandwich man." Jimmy looked at him, really looked at him, memorized his face, the scar on his knuckles, the way he stood, the sound of his voice. "No problem," Jimmy said. The men laughed and walked away. As soon as they were out of sight, Jimmy closed up his cart 2 hours early. He walked north on Lenox Avenue, then west on 145th, then north again on Amsterdam. It took him 30 minutes to reach 147th Street. The building was a narrow brownstone, 4 stories, with iron bars on the first-floor windows. Jimmy stood outside for a long time. His heart was hammering in his chest. He thought about Ruth, about Dorothy, about what he was about to do. Then he thought about Miss Carey crying in the hospital, about the burned apartment, about the men who would keep hurting people because nobody stopped them. He climbed the front steps and went inside. The hallway smelled like old wood and cigarette smoke. He climbed to the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B was at the end of the hall. There was no name on the door. He knocked 3 times. Slow. The door opened. A man stood there. He was in his 50s, black, with gray at his temples and a face that gave away nothing. He looked at Jimmy and waited. "My name is Jimmy Patterson," Jimmy said. His voice was shaking. "I was told to come here if I had a problem." The man studied him for a long moment. "What's the problem?" Jimmy described the 5 men, the extortion, the fire, the threats. He described the leader in detail, the scar, the leather jacket, everything. The man listened without interrupting. When Jimmy finished, the man nodded once. "Go back to your cart. Take care of your business. Don't think about this anymore." "That's it?" "That's it." The man closed the door. Jimmy stood in the hallway for a moment, unsure if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Then he turned and walked back down the stairs. Jimmy returned to his cart and tried to work like normal. An hour passed, then another. He kept looking over his shoulder, expecting something to happen. Nothing did. The streets were quiet. Then, just after 7 in the evening, 2 black Cadillacs turned onto 125th Street. They moved slowly, deliberately. They stopped right in front of Jimmy's cart. 4 men got out. Jimmy recognized 2 of them. The tall one with the scar on his face. The stocky one with the gold watch. The other 2 were new, bigger, harder looking. They didn't say anything to Jimmy, they just stood there, waiting. 10 minutes later, the 5 men appeared. The same 5 who'd been extorting Jimmy. They were laughing, talking loud, walking like they owned the street. When they saw the 4 men standing near Jimmy's cart, they slowed down. The leader, the tall one with the scarred knuckles, tried to act tough. "You boys lost?" The tall man from the Cadillac didn't answer. He just walked up to the leader and grabbed him by the front of his jacket. No warning. No words. He dragged him toward the car. The other 3 moved fast. In less than 30 seconds, all 5 of the extortionists were shoved into the 2 Cadillacs. One of them tried to fight back and got hit so hard in the stomach he doubled over. There was no yelling, no guns drawn, just quick, efficient, brutal silence. The doors closed. The Cadillacs drove away. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. Jimmy stood there, his heart pounding, staring at the spot where the cars had been. Nobody on the street said a word. People just kept walking, like nothing had happened. Because in Harlem, you learned not to see things. You learned to mind your business. Those 5 men were never seen again. Not in Harlem, not anywhere. 3 days later, a kid no more than 12 years old came up to Jimmy's cart. "You Jimmy Patterson?" "Yeah." The kid handed him a folded piece of paper. "Man told me to give you this." Then the kid ran off. Jimmy unfolded the paper. It was an address. The Red Rooster. 8 p.m. tomorrow, come alone. Jimmy's hands were trembling as he read it. That night, he told Ruth. She didn't cry this time. She just looked at him with tired, frightened eyes. "You're in it now," she said. "Whatever this is, you're in it." The next night, Jimmy put on his only clean shirt and walked to the Red Rooster. It was a restaurant on 138th Street, the kind of place where Harlem's elite went. Politicians, businessmen, musicians, people with money and power. The kind of place Jimmy had never been inside. He walked through the front door and a man in a suit stopped him immediately. "You got a reservation?" "I'm supposed to meet someone," Jimmy said. "Jimmy Patterson." The man's expression changed. He nodded. "Follow me." He led Jimmy through the main dining room. People were eating steak and drinking wine. A jazz band was playing in the corner. Everyone was dressed nice. Everyone looked like they belonged. Jimmy felt completely out of place. The man led him to a private room in the back. Heavy curtains, a single table, and sitting at that table, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, was the man Jimmy had given a sandwich to 5 weeks ago. Except he didn't look like a broke man anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, power. The man gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Jimmy." Jimmy sat. His throat was so dry he could barely swallow. The man poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on the table. He slid one across to Jimmy. "You know who I am now, don't you?" Jimmy nodded. "Yes, sir. You're Bumpy Johnson." Bumpy smiled. "That's right. And you're the man who fed me when I had nothing. No questions asked. No expectation of payment. You did that because it was the right thing to do." He leaned back in his chair. "You know how rare that is? Real kindness. Not kindness because you want something. Not kindness because someone's watching, just kindness because that's who you are. Jimmy didn't know what to say. Bumpy continued. I got a lot of money, Jimmy. I got power. I got men who'll do anything I tell them. But you know what I don't have much of? People I can trust. People who do the right thing when nobody's looking. He leaned forward. Those 5 men who were bothering you. They're gone. They won't be back. Ever. They were working without permission, shaking down hard-working people in my neighborhood. That doesn't fly. Not here. Thank you, Jimmy said quietly. Bumpy held up a hand. I'm not done. I want to offer you something, a job. Not selling drugs, not hurting people, nothing like that. I just need eyes and ears. You're on that corner every day. You see things. You hear things. People talk to you because you're a good man. They trust you. I want you to be my eyes in that part of Harlem. You see someone getting extorted, you tell me. You see cops shaking people down, you tell me. You see someone moving product without permission, you tell me. That's it, nothing illegal, just information. He paused. In return, I pay you $50 a week. Every week. Cash. And if anyone ever bothers you or your family, you come to me. Nobody touches you. Nobody. $50 a week. That was more than Jimmy made in 2 weeks at his cart. That was medicine for Dorothy. That was food. That was rent paid on time. That was Ruth not having to worry every single day. But it was also a line that once crossed you could never uncross. Jimmy thought about his father, about doing the right thing, about protecting your family, about the cost of survival. He looked Bumpy Johnson in the eyes and said, I'll do it. For the next 5 years, Jimmy's life changed in ways both small and enormous. Every week, a different man would come to his cart, order a sandwich, leave an envelope under his plate with $50 in it. Jimmy would take the envelope home, hide the money, use it carefully. The medicine for Dorothy was never late again. Ruth saw a real doctor for her back. They moved to a slightly better apartment on 126th Street. 3 rooms instead of 2. Heat that actually worked. Jimmy saved enough to upgrade from his cart to a small lunch counter on the corner of 126th and Adam Clayton Powell. Nothing fancy. 6 stools, a grill, a coffee maker. But it was his, a real business. He hired a kid from the neighborhood to help him during busy hours. People started calling the place Jimmy's, and Jimmy kept his end of the deal. He watched. He listened. When a crooked cop started demanding weekly payments from the bodega owner across the street, Jimmy reported it. The cop disappeared from the beat a week later. When 3 men from the Bronx started selling heroin to high school kids near the school on 127th, Jimmy reported it. Those men were found beaten badly in an alley with a warning spray painted on the wall. Touch the kids again and you're dead. When a landlord tried to force out an elderly couple so he could raise the rent, Jimmy reported it. The landlord suddenly decided to let them stay. Crime in the neighborhood dropped. Not all crime, but the kind of crime that hurt regular people. The shakedowns, the random violence, the predatory behavior. It was like an invisible hand was protecting the community. And in a way, it was. Bumpy Johnson had always seen himself as more than a criminal. He saw himself as the protector of Harlem, the man who kept outside forces from destroying his community. And Jimmy had become one of his tools. But Jimmy lived every day with fear. Fear that the police would find out. Fear that Bumpy's enemies would target him. Fear that Ruth and Dorothy would pay for his choices. He started checking over his shoulder constantly. He kept a knife under the counter of his lunch counter. He made Ruth promise that if anything ever happened to him, she'd take Dorothy and leave New York immediately. Go to her sister in Philadelphia. Never come back. Then in early 1960, it all came crashing down. Jimmy was at his lunch counter one afternoon when 2 cars pulled up. Not Cadillacs, unmarked police cars. 6 men got out, detectives, federal agents. They walked in, and one of them, a white man in his 40s with cold eyes, said, "James Patterson?" "Yes." "You're coming with us." They didn't arrest him officially. They just took him, put him in the back of a car and drove him to the 32nd precinct. They put him in an interrogation room and left him there for 2 hours. No water, no explanation. Just sitting in a cold room with a metal table and 2 chairs. Finally, 2 federal agents came in. One was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a tired face. The other was younger, hungry-looking. The older one sat down across from Jimmy and slid a manila folder across the table. "Open it." Jimmy opened it. Inside were surveillance photos. Photos of him taking envelopes from men. Photos of him walking into buildings in parts of Harlem he had no reason to be in. Photos of him talking to known associates of Bumpy Johnson. "You're in trouble, Jimmy," the older agent said. His voice was almost kind. "We've been watching you for 8 months. We know you work for Bumpy Johnson. We know you take money from him. We know you pass him information. That makes you an accessory to racketeering, drug trafficking, and about 15 other federal crimes." Jimmy's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. "We can make this easy or hard," the younger agent said. He leaned forward. "Easy is, you cooperate. You tell us everything. Where Bumpy meets his people, who his suppliers are, how he moves money. You testify and we put you and your family in witness protection. New names, new city. Fresh start. Your daughter gets to grow up. You get to watch her graduate, get married, have kids." He paused. "Hard is, you stay loyal. You keep quiet. We charge you. You go to prison for 20 years minimum. Your wife has to raise your daughter alone. No money, no support. And Bumpy? He'll forget about you in a week. You think he cares about you? You're a sandwich vendor. You're nobody to him." The older agent pulled out another photo. This one was of Dorothy. She was walking out of school, her backpack on her shoulders, smiling. "Pretty girl," the older agent said softly. "Be a shame if she grew up without a father." Jimmy's hands curled into fists, but he said nothing. For 4 hours they pressured him, threatened him, showed him more photos, told him stories about what happened to men who went to federal prison, told him his family would suffer, that he'd lose everything. Jimmy sat there silent, his mind racing. He thought about Bumpy, about the 5 years of protection, the money, the safety. He thought about the code, loyalty above everything. But he also thought about Dorothy, about Ruth, about whether any of this was worth losing them. Finally, he looked at the older agent and said, "I want a lawyer." The agent's face hardened. "You don't get a lawyer yet. This is just a conversation." "Then I'm done talking." They left him alone in the room for another hour. Then the door opened. The older agent walked in. His face was pale. "You're free to go." Jimmy blinked. "What?" "You're free. We don't have enough to hold you. You can leave." Jimmy stood up slowly, not believing it. "Just like that?" The agent looked at him with something like pity. "Just like that, but Jimmy, you're living on borrowed time. One day this is all gonna catch up with you, and when it does, don't say we didn't warn you." Jimmy walked out of the precinct into the cold night air. Standing on the corner was a black Cadillac. The tall man with the scar on his face was leaning against it. He nodded to Jimmy. "Get in. I'll take you home." Jimmy got in. As the car drove through Harlem, the man said, "Bumpy made a call to a certain captain, to a certain judge. He made sure you walked out of there." "Why?" "Because loyalty works both ways." 5 years later, in 1968, Jimmy got a message. The same kid, now 17, came to his lunch counter and handed him a folded piece of paper. Jimmy opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, it said, "Your debt is paid. You're free. Take care of your family." That was it. No signature, no explanation. The weekly payments stopped. The protection stopped. Jimmy was on his own again. 2 months later, he saw on the news that Bumpy Johnson had died of a heart attack at the Wells restaurant. He was 62 years old. Jimmy closed his lunch counter early that day. He went home and didn't say anything to Ruth. He just sat in his kitchen staring at the wall. That night, he made 3 sandwiches, roast beef, pickles, mustard. He wrapped them carefully and walked to the corner of 125th and Lenox. A homeless man was sitting against a building shivering. Jimmy handed him the sandwiches. "Here, eat." The man looked up, surprised. "I don't got no money." "Don't need it," Jimmy said. Then he walked home. Years later, in 1973, Jimmy was still running his lunch counter. Dorothy had graduated high school and was studying nursing at Harlem Hospital. Ruth had opened a small hair salon 2 blocks away. They had a decent life, not rich, not fancy, but stable, safe. And Jimmy had learned something in those years. Kindness has power, loyalty has a cost, and sometimes the line between right and wrong isn't as clear as you think it is. He never told Dorothy the full story. She knew her father ran a lunch counter. She knew he worked hard. She knew he was respected in the neighborhood. But she didn't know about the 5 years, about the money, about the men who disappeared, about the night her father sat in a police interrogation room and chose silence over safety. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some debts can never be fully repaid, and some choices, once made, follow you for the rest of your life. Jimmy Patterson learned that the hard way. And every time someone walked into his lunch counter and couldn't pay, he'd feed them anyway. Because that's who he was. That's who he'd always been. Even when the world tried to make him into something else. Did you enjoy this incredible story of Bumpy and how he helped Harlem? Consider clicking the button. New exclusive stories every day.